Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode, I guess, of the Pen and Brick series, where in this tutorial I'm going to be talking about Blender and how I use Blender as a modeling software for architectural competitions and certain elements in the office. Now, I'm sure that this tutorial will be part one of potentially many. If you're interested, do tell down below. I won't be covering exactly everything that has to do with modeling itself, more so why I believe that Blender is a fantastic tool, and maybe a little bit of a competition that I've done, going through how I created some of the scenes, either from the technical modeling space or the cinematography element. How do I actually render these things out and create life out of these projects? So without further ado, I'm going to jump into a competition that I did. It was in 2023 for the Jean-Jacques Rougerie Foundation. Now, unfortunately, I did not win, but I am happy to be on the website and shortlisted. So let's jump into it. I've just opened up the file that I used for this competition, and it's a relatively simple building. Not in its geometry, but in the sense that it's essentially the same geometry that's repeated in each quadrant. As you can see, there are 4 quadrants here, and they are repeated. And the element in the middle is a kit bashing of sorts. Now, I do want to say that Blender originally is used for, or at least it's popularly used by 3D designers in terms of video games and for animations, etc. So there's an art that architects and architectural designers don't really have in their asset box, let's say, and that's kit bashing. So one of the main reasons I love Blender is if I need to have something kit bashed, and that's essentially the combining of different existing elements together to create something new. So in this example, we can see that this is a tower crane that I got up. I used some architectural elements to kind of emphasize it. There's some parts from industrial buildings that I've decided to use, some floating rafts from others, and putting them together and adding my own twist and design makes it, I believe, even more rich and textured and detailed than if you were to model everything from scratch. One of the reasons I love Blender so much, it's for how quickly you can prototype something, how quickly you can create a massing of something very simply. So if I can give a quick example very quickly, I can start to edit it similarly to how you would use SketchUp, where it's very much a push and pull function. And let's say I liked the shape of this building, this massing. What I can do really quickly with Blender, if I open up the side tab, is you can see there's something called modifiers. Now, modifiers would be almost a simplified version of, if you use Rhino, Grasshopper, or Dynamo and Revit, these kind of procedural elements where you can very quickly design something using these tabs. Now, to give a very quick example, let's say I needed to array this a couple of times in either direction. I can set this up here, and it remembers it. So if I need to change something later on, add more, add less, I can do this. Now let's say I wanted to create a very quick frame, structural frame, to explain how I can do this project. You can do that as well. You can use some of the assets, start to play with the thicknesses and play with the parameters within, and you can get some really nice results. And again, you can change any of these modifiers within the project very quickly. Now, another aspect that I love about Blender is its ability to copy and retain information. What I mean by this is, Blender has a very special way of copy pasting. It isn't Control-C, Control-V like any other software. If I do a Shift-D, then you'll be able to see that I can individually edit these elements. Now, if I was to do an Alt-D, I'm able to retain the family in essence. And when I edit one of the families, it edits whatever family has been directly copied from. Now, this is really useful for quick prototyping, as that enables me to, at least on a design, have elements that are isolated and copied, and then others that are controlled throughout the entire project. Here, in essence, what we're looking at is just a section of the model. So this is one quadrant. As you can see through these tabs right here, layers are fairly similar to any other software that you've used before, whether that's Rhino, that's SketchUp. Everything is kept within here, and you can use these to sort out, you can color code them, which again, like any other software. So this will be very normal for anyone that's jumping from one software to Blender. The difficulty, I believe, from Blender side is learning all of the shortcuts and how to actually create things. That's where it gets a little bit tricky, and I can recommend that you watch other videos before jumping into the software directly. So taking apart this very complicated element is in essence made out of parameters and modifiers. But if you needed to, you could also script, such as using, again, Grasshopper or Dynamo with these scripting tabs. And through here, you can create essentially your geometry as you would on other softwares. This was done though, however, just with modifiers and plugins. And if I'm just going to hide this very quickly, the rest of the scene is relatively simple. So all these coral elements have been built up. And within these, what I wanted to do is basically nest these architectural elements. Now, all of this is very concept stage, so don't pay attention to the architectural layout, but quite simply, copy pasting floors through, adding a couple of chairs, again, kit bashing elements that I found online, adding a couple of lights, and we can get the idea. If I just hide all these elements, you can see that this is fairly typical in terms of its build up. There's nothing too special about it. And all you need to do is by arraying or copy pasting these through. What is quite nice about modeling in Blender, as you might have seen, is that your textures already come up. Now, this is because there's a lot of attention and effort done into the texturing of elements. When I looked at doing the coral, what was very important for me was the textural aspect of this. And as you can see, zooming into these, they're all patterned with these almost colorful mosaic tiles that actually are supposed to resemble what it looks like when you crush plastic together, that randomness. And all of this can be built up using, once again, nodes. Now, all your nodes are saved within the shader editor. And the shader editor, in essence, is where you can change all of your textures, change up the sizes, change up the color, etc. You can download some or create your own. And I think that's what's really missing within the architectural world, is we tend to add a relatively generic texture, such as when using Enscape, we'll put Enscape Concrete 01 or Timber 02. But this means that you're able to generate a lot more detail without needing to actually model it or transform it into a crazy mesh, which I really, really, really love. Now, jumping back onto the project, this quadrant is then copied. And if we jump into my scene again, this is where I believe that Blender is slightly different from other softwares. Now, you need to think about Blender almost cinematographically. You need to be able to understand where your lighting comes from, how you frame. It's a lot more complicated than just using generic versions of, let's say, Enscape directly from your computer. You need to have a little bit more artistic flair when it comes to modeling in the software and setting up a scene. So you can add multiple cameras within your scene. As you can see, I'm looking straight ahead. This is the cover image that I used for the competition with a little boat yacht that's just here that I used, I downloaded online. And if I switch on to rendered preview, you can already start to get a sense about how these textures come out. Now, Blender itself has two different rendering softwares, engines, I guess. You've got Eevee and you've got Cycles. Now, I tend to use Eevee when it comes to animations, and I tend to use Cycles when it comes to specific images. That's because there's just a little bit more attention to bounce lighting that creates a bit more realism when using Cycles. And to talk a little bit more about how I used kit bashing. So for this central part, what I wanted to do is create this hangar looking space, having downloaded elements online, as well as using, again, the very same tools as I showed at the beginning. I found and constructed an arch. And using modifiers, I was able to, on this right hand side, to essentially mirror and flip these, control how many there are within the scene, array them, and create this frame right here. One aspect I really like about Blender is the ability to create animation and motion from the objects that you have in your scene, even if they're not very complicated. So one example is this model that I was able to get online and slightly modify. You can see within this tab on the right hand side that I can control the speed of how much this ramp goes. I can control its width, its length, all of these are parameters. Now I could build this up myself, or again, I can kit bash when it comes to competitions. By using shape keys in Blender, if you need to look at this a bit in more detail, I can essentially, by changing the value, decide how my crane is placed. Now, this is very useful if I don't want to have a fixed decision on something and I want to have the opportunity and the flexibility to move it side by side at some point if I wanted to. as you can see, setting up the lights, I can control through my material editors how the fluorescent lights will work by turning on the sun, which kind of gives an overall color and lighting for the scene, control what that looks like, as well as using some specific point lighting to make everything come out even crispier, as you can see from the final render. Now, let me take you through just one of the scenes and show you how it's done. What I wanted to do with this scene is have a very soft pan that goes through the elevation of the building essentially, and then ending up halfway through so you can see the ocean and understand its context, its position. And the way I did this was very, very simple with my model already in place. If I switch back just so you can understand the massing, what I had was a camera set up that you can see right here that essentially navigates through the space. And by giving that camera certain information in terms of when it starts and when it stops, so you can see all of these can be added using keyframes, I'm able to control that motion. I'm able to decide where the lighting goes. I wanted a front lighting that you can see right here that's right in front. And in motion, the idea was to have this very slow transition. Now, as you can see when I'm working through these, there are multiple options within when you're working and modeling, similar to, again, Raw or Rhino if you're using wireframe mode or shaded mode or ghosted mode. These drastically change how quickly you can start modeling things. And to give you an idea of just the shaded version of Rhino, this is what it looks like. And then with a little bit of work within your tab, in terms of your sampling and your viewport and your rendering and your denoising, which is something you should look at if you're interested in doing animation specifically, you can give texture and detail and style to your buildings, whether you're aiming for something that's very photorealistic or something that's very straightforward. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's very, very quick. If there is something specific that you want me to talk in the next few parts, please do share in the comments. I want to make sure that I can continue doing these at a quick pace. This was just an introductory video, and I want to give a little bit more explanation about how I actually model and render and animate these things and what are the settings that I like to use. I believe that, at least in the world of architectural design, we feel a little bit scared to use softwares that others haven't used before, so I'm more than happy to share my knowledge. Until then, I hope you guys have a great day, evening, night, whatever it might be, and I'll see you all soon.
Over 400 million tons of plastic are produced every year, with 14 million tons ending up in our oceans, endangering our planet's underwater life. The Coral Manufacture Station aims to be one small part of a much-needed mission to restore our planet by navigating toward floating plastic islands and removing them to process into construction blocks. The design is inspired by the affected coral, with their fascinating and beautiful hyperbolic form, with floating pieces of the structure from the repurposed ocean waste. Processed materials are used for the expansion of the station itself, moreover creating fantastic floating devices for islands and countries in dire need of these floating spaces. Let's clean up our oceans, one piece of plastic at a time.